Welcome to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that connects the food on your plate to the bigger world. I'm your host, Dana DiPrima. Today I'm talking with David Wise of Native Wise, an Ojibwe farmer on the Fond du Lac Reservation in Minnesota. David grew up with food deeply connected to the seasons, the land, and his community. Today he raises bison, harvests manoomin or wild rice, produces maple sugar and honey, and is building a business around foods with deep cultural and ecological roots. But his path here is a fascinating one. We talk about the knowledge he inherited from his family, his years working in forestry and conservation, and with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and what he learned about native agriculture and access to traditional foods along the way. We talk about the return of Bison to his family ranch, the extraordinary story behind it, and what that return has meant to David and his community. We talk about wild rice and clean water and changing weather, food and health, and why protecting traditional foods requires protecting the ecosystems that make them possible. And we talk about the practical side of building Native Wise today, growing a herd, creating markets, supplying restaurants, and building processing infrastructure, raising the next generation inside the work. David is a wonderful storyteller, and this conversation is really warm and funny, surprising, and deeply moving. I think you're gonna love it. So let's get started with David.
My mom was kind of a chef. She was one of these people that could just put things together and everything tasted so great. And we grew up on a farm with a nice vegetable garden, and we raised our own chickens, and we had like a small family operation with a couple pigs and some beef cows and different things. And then we always had deer meat and wild rice. So I feel kind of like lucky that I got to grow up eating what I would consider gourmet food all the time, just because we had access to all that fresh produce as a kid.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up right here on the Fond du Lac Reservation, and I come from a long line of wild rice harvesters going back thousands of years in our record here, that some of my relatives, old Chief Animus sung. The river that runs through our ranch is named after him. And my relatives, I'm not sure when they really started doing agriculture. There wasn't a lot of good record keeping, but I know that my grandmother, who was born in the late 1800s, she and her husband and my aunt on the farm where we live now, they always had large vegetable gardens. And she talked about, they would pick blueberries, and that was like their fruit source. And they had introduced species like rhubarb and different things too. But we didn't say we lived in a food desert by any means, but we grew our own stuff, and it was all things that would exist here regionally, whether it be apples, cranberries from the bogs, blueberries. All the jars would be filled in the canning shelves and in the root cellar. Even when I was a kid, I remember we'd harvest all the root vegetables, and we'd make sure that none of them were bruised, because things had to last all the way through the winter. And I kind of just grew up in the tail end of that, churning butter and small farm operations. And we weren't the only ones. There was a lot of people around this area that lived on small family farms, because it was more or less a hardship to travel long distances back then. So we had to probably pretty much grow and process what we were going to eat. And we went to the stores on occasion to get certain things that they didn't have. But we even made our own sugar. We made maple sugar instead of maple syrup. My grandmother would always cook the sap from the maple trees down. We would either drink it as a sap drink. Rarely did we make syrup, or we'd cook it all the way past syrup and make it into sugar, because then it was easier to store. And she would make these little cakes they called sissy baquat cakes. And if you were really good, you'd get one of those as a treat. I remember she would put them in like wax paper or a little birch bark container with a little lid on it. And if we helped her in the garden or helped her with different projects, she would always reward us with one of those little cakes, or we would sprinkle it over the top of like a strawberry. It was a seasonal thing. As Ojibwe people, we really go by the moons. We have 13 moons in our calendar year. And so I always remember the first really fruity taste of the spring would always be like the rhubarb and the wild strawberries. So I remember she would take the wild rice flour and make a wild rice cake, and then would have like a rhubarb or wild strawberry with maple sugar crumbled on it. Oh my God, that's the best dessert ever, I think.
So tell me how it all started for you. I mean, obviously, you've got this incredible family heritage of farming and growing up with all of those flavors. Tell me where it kind of happened for you.
Well, like you said, I think that's where it really happened, was just, learning all those different techniques of, my dad would really pay attention to the weather patterns when they planted certain things. And I remember wild rice was a year-round thing, so we'd travel down the riverways and take the beaver dams out to make sure that the water levels were right for the rice. So I didn't realize all that stuff when I was a kid, but now I think, well, all that stuff was basically, they were doing that so we'd have food to eat, They would burn the old fields, and my dad would say, oh, the deer will love that, and there won't be as many ticks in there, and the deer will come in. And we would start harvesting deer, bucks, and only bucks, but in July or August if we needed to. But if we didn't need to, we'd wait till later seasons. But there was always something going on. There was always a community event. And now that I realize it was all centered around food and community, really. I remember my dad, we would go harvest deer and we would go to this little community called Sawyer. And my dad would have the deer cut up in different pieces, and he'd drive into the elders and say, okay, would you guys want some deer? And they'd all come out with their little knife or their pan or whatever, and they'd get some of the deer. And a lot of people throw away the ribs. A lot of those old natives love that part of the deer, or they'd love the neck roast. And so I guess I got to appreciate food for what it's worth. It all has its unique properties if you know how to prepare it right. One of our traditions is we would always eat a snapping turtle every spring. We'd harvest a snapping turtle, and the snapping turtle has like 7 different colors of meat in it, all the way from real dark to almost like a light chicken colored meat. And so I guess we kind of ate seasonally, and that kind of got me interested in permaculture when I was going to college, and forest ecology. When I took that class, I was like, oh my God, my grandma was a forest ecologist, and I just didn't know it. You know what I mean? So like a lot of that stuff, I could really relate to it at the higher levels in college because I felt like I already had a background to it. So I ended up working for the Department of Agriculture for quite a few years. First, I was a Forest Service worker, and I did firefighting and a bunch of different things like that, law enforcement, wildlife habitat, and timber marking. And then I went on to become a tribal liaison with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. So I was helping tribes to get better access to farm bill programs. And that was a pretty rewarding part of my job too. I got to teach some courses and got to look at agriculture, especially native agriculture all around the country. And I thought, that's kind of my passion, not doing paperwork so much for the government, but my passion is like growing food and interacting with the ecosystems in a good way. And so that's what we're doing here at the ranch. And it's funny how we ended up here at the ranch because it was my great aunt and uncle's place. But we always hunted and visited here. And my dad was kind of the caretaker because my aunt's husband passed away at a young age. So I kind of always felt like it was like the family ranch or whatever. And my cousin, an only child, she inherited it. And I was kind of the manager at that point, but really not too active with doing anything at the ranch other than just maybe hunting a little bit. So then I had this research project at work, and I was supposed to research a native leader from the past. And so I knew some stories of Chief Buffalo because I knew he was my grandfather going back 6 generations. And so when I did that research and found out all the different things that he was involved in, he lived during the Indian Removal Act and had signed treaties before that. And so he was really inspirational in stopping the Removal Act that was in place in that time period. And after I found out all the details, from looking at historical documents and stuff for this research project, I started having these dreams about him. And he was like, bring back the bison. He came to me in these dreams, and I was like, I didn't really know what it meant at first. He didn't say that at first. It's just kind of like half dreaming about the trail that he went on to try to stop those different things that were happening. I guess I was just kind of like reliving my research that I'd studied. And then at one point I started hearing these buffalo hooves, and he was like, bring back the bison. And I was like, well, oh my God, maybe I should help the tribe get bison. I had been trying to do that for a while anyway. And just about then, my cousin called me up, and she's like, I'm thinking about selling the ranch. It's just kind of a burden because I live so far away. But she said, I'd like to sell it to you. And she offered it to us for a really good price. And I thought I was in my forever home. I was by the lake and everything, where I kind of liked it. And my wife and I talked over, and we're like, yeah, let's do it. Let's bring back the bison. So we bought part of the ranch, and then we were able to work with the Tonka Fund, which is to rehome bison that are surplus on public lands, like say Nature Conservancy lands where the population's getting too high and they deem that they need to reduce the herd numbers. So Tonka helps put those back into tribal operations if there's a farm or if there's a tribe themselves that want to start a bison herd, but it's mostly to work with private tribal members. And so we got on their list, and you had to meet a bunch of different requirements with the land and the fencing and the watering and all that. So it was quite a process, taking down all these old, like, broken down barbed wire and sheep fences from the pioneer days back here on this land. But the nice thing was I knew the land intimately, and it has these two rivers, Sung River and Stony Brook, that connect in the back of the property. And I knew that it would be a great habitat for bison. So we worked really hard, little by little, taking some of these fences down that were in disrepair. And I kind of always wanted to do that because sometimes I'd see deer that were ripped on their legs where they must have hit that barbed wire fence, And when I'd hunt with my dog, sometimes it would get ripped up from the barbed wire. So it was kind of a rewarding thing to take that out of the ground. And we put up wildlife-friendly fencing, so it's a smooth wire. So I overbuilt it because I was kind of worried. Everyone was like, oh, the bison are going to get out, And so we ended up getting 12 females, younger ones. They were like maybe a year and a half old. And it was in the fall. And so we put them in the corral for a while. And then that was a spiritual experience. When I first heard those hooves, when they jumped off of the truck, it was like in the evening. The guy was kind of late coming in with them. And it was just like my dream came to reality. It was like kind of a surreal experience,
This story isn't really about farming, hunting, or even bison. It's about remembering. Ancestral wisdom is not always lost. Sometimes it simply goes unrecognized until we have the language to understand it. David's dream of bringing back the bison can be viewed not merely as a mystical experience, but as a call to restore a relationship that had been interrupted across generations. In a culture that often measures success by what we acquire, this story offers a different measure. What are we being asked to remember, repair, and pass on? The return of the bison was not just the arrival of animals onto a ranch. It was the restoration of a living connection between land, ancestry, community, and purpose. In that sense, the dream wasn't predicting the future. It was awakening something that had been waiting in the past all along. This is a grandfather 6 generations prior, yeah?
Yeah.
And so when he appeared to you, was it like, are you hearing him? Are you seeing him? Do you know what he looks like?
Well, yeah, I seen pictures of him, and he kind of looked like my dad in a way. The family resemblance was still there a little bit. And I could see my grandma a little bit because I seen pictures of them. Like, I don't know if they were like reproductions or what, but it's amazing what you can find on your family tree stuff nowadays too. That was really interesting. They even went back like 2 generations after him. And he lived over in the Apostle Islands of Wisconsin there in Lake Superior. He was the lead on the 1854, the 1837, and I think the 1842 treaty in Michigan. So all those areas are still part of our ceded territory. And then there's several reservations that were created under that same treaty. Different bands were recognized and they retained certain rights. Like a lot of people think the Indians got given rights by the government, but they really just retained rights that they always had. And all that stuff was tied to food, like in those treaties, it was the right to hunt, fish, gather, and live off the land. That's what they were thinking of way back then.
So you're doing this research, right? And your grandfather comes to you while you're looking into all of this. I'm just curious, as you're doing research and also working with other tribes through your work with USDA, what you're seeing in terms of the landscape of native food. Meaning, when I talked to Sean, for example, I asked him what he ate when he was a kid. And he's like, we ate stuff from a can. We ate whatever the commissary had. Like my mom didn't cook native recipes or food or have it even handed down because it had really been erased. So I'm just curious what you were seeing in your role at the USDA and working with tribes and having this research project.
Well, I've seen a lot of that kind of thing, the commodity food programs, and even some of my relatives were victims of that. One got diabetes from eating the wrong kind of food. So if your people evolved eating a certain diet and you drastically change it, it's not going to probably have a very good impact on your health. So yeah, my position took me to a lot of different meetings where people were talking about those topics. But I always seen the pride in people when there'd be like a traditional meal or when they started getting access to bison meat and wild rice into that program. I think it made me feel good that people could have a chance to have a healthier lifestyle and eat, even though you weren't like well off and you could afford fancy food. You'd still have choices where you could eat something that would be healthy for you, like wild rice, bison meat, or some of the fresh produce that they started offering a little more.
So the bison come off the truck and you hear their hooves. Do you hear from your grandfather again?
Nope, I never heard from him again. But I often think about, like, when I'm out there listening to the bison, I wonder, if that was just my imagination or if we really have that connection.
Tell me about what happened. You bring these female buffalo in and they're in the corral. Then how has it evolved?
Well, we had a welcoming ceremony for them that week. The community was just super excited. A lot of the traditional natives came out and we played the drum and we smudged and we thanked the Great Spirit and we thanked the universe for bringing them back into our lives, because we think of them as kind of like a relative, like all the different animals and plants are here for us to be able to utilize and respect. And that just goes way back. Whenever we harvest the rice, we give an offering. Whenever we hunt, we give an offering. And it can be something just as simple as just saying a little prayer or singing a song or putting out your tobacco, or just the thought of being respectful for that animal or whatever you're harvesting. Like sometimes when I go out in the bison pasture and I just shut my eyes and listen to the wind blowing through the pines and the bison grunting and moving around out there and doing their thing. And I think of the ancestors that came before me, and they're probably happy that they're back on the land and they're feeding the people again, And we're trying to utilize every part of the animal. We're trying to reconnect with that. We use the tallow for different, like lip balm. And then we got this product called Boss Babe Body Butter. I couldn't say it for a long time, but it's really good for your skin. And then one of our bulls is named Brutus. We got a Brutus salve. It's more of if you have a cut or something that you want to put it on. So we're trying to do that. We're donating some of the heads and hides for cultural art stuff and ceremonial purposes. And we're working on pulling a workshop together where we're going to bring some of our friends from South Dakota, some native community members from out there to come over and help us with some of the processing, how they do it. Might be a little different than what we're doing.
How is that exactly? What do you mean?
Well, they have traditions where they dry the meat, but I was thinking their environment's a little drier out there, and less humid. But I have an elderly friend who has a ranch out there, and I've been kind of networking with him to help market some of his bison. And we talked about maybe doing a little workshop here. I think it's called BOP. They cut the bison real thin and they hang it in the sun to dry, but it has to be just the right conditions. I make a traditional jerky. I have a cedar smokehouse that's all made out of cedar. And I smoke it with maple or alder wood from around here. And I do what I call like a light tender smoking. So it's kind of a mellow, smoky flavor. And I don't make a really thin. I'm like making it a little thicker, like a steak bite. And everyone loves them.
It sounds amazing.
We started our own little bison processing facility here right on the ranch. We're just putting the final touches on that so that we'll be able to sell quarters and halves right here from the ranch.
Now, is that a USDA facility or it would be state sanctioned?
Yeah, we're kind of working toward, under the state rules in Minnesota, you can sell quarters and halves without so much inspection type stuff, Like we don't want to bring the animals into a kill room. That kind of freaks me out just thinking of that, I'd rather just harvest them out on the field and then take the innards out there, bring them into the clean facility here and then skin them. And then I put them in my walk-in cooler, process the meat after they hang for maybe 14. I've been working on some dry aging because I really like that kind of meat. And when we do our deer in the fall, I notice if the weather's just right and I dry age it for a while, it gets really tender and really good. So I want to do some experiments with the bison like that. The meat that we get nowadays from the supermarket, most of it's not aged much at all. And it's vacuum sealed. So that's why, if you go to a high-end restaurant and you get one of their aged steaks, it'll have a different flavor and tenderness than the average meat that you buy at the supermarket these days. Because on the production line, they just don't have the time to dry age anymore. And that takes a little more of an inspection process too. But working with Awamni and Sean Sherman, they're really into dry aging steaks. And man, I went for their grand opening the other day and it was amazing.
What I find most interesting is how this story blurs the line between preservation and innovation. We often think of tradition as something static, something inherited and protected from change. But here, tradition is alive. He's learning from elders in South Dakota, experimenting with dry aging techniques, creating new products from tallow and adapting old practices to a different climate and landscape. The goal isn't to recreate the past exactly as it was. It's to continue a conversation with it. In many ways, that's what farming has always demanded. Every generation inherits knowledge, but no generation inherits the exact same conditions. Different weather, different ecosystems, different markets, different challenges. The art is knowing what wisdom remains timeless and what must evolve. Food is where that negotiation becomes so visible. Every cut of meat, every preservation method, every recipe carries traces of the past while reflecting the realities of the present. The result is not a replica of tradition, but its next chapter.
We're so lucky in this area to have clean water, great soil, and I think the soil makes the food taste different too. Where the meat is, where the buffalo graze and what kind of plants they're eating. And the same with the vegetables. Some of those vegetables that you just get from the grocery store, they just don't have flavor,
Yeah. So help me a little bit with the chronology. Your cousin decides that she wants to sell the ranch to you.
Well, she was just struggling with trying to rent it out and just dealing with farmers with the haying, and things were kind of getting run down, and she didn't live around here and she had some bad experiences with renters and stuff. And so I was trying to help her out with that, and the house was falling into disrepair and she just didn't want to put a lot of money into it. And so they were thinking of actually like demolishing the house. And I was like, oh man, it made me feel bad because I remember my old great aunt and she would make baked bread in her wood stove here. We still got it right here in the house. And there was some old bachelor guy living in here and he had like arts all over the place. I came over to check on him, like, oh my God, Aunt Rhodey would die if she's seen what you're doing to her house, you know? So we decided we're just going to, and sometimes I kind of regretted it because it was a lot of work, but we started right from the foundation and had to redo like a lot of the stuff because it was built, the foundation was all built with stones and some of it was falling apart. And anyway, I got lucky and got some local people around here that knew about stonework to help. And we ended up putting it all back together. It's a dry basement now. And we added on and re-insulated and we love the place now.
Now, is that when you started really farming for real, like as a business? Is when you brought the bison in, or were you farming before that?
No, we were farming before that. So right where I grew up was like about 3 miles from here through the woods. There's a river that runs through Stony Brook and goes through all the wild rice lakes. We grew up over there like 3 miles away. And so we had a little family farm that was part of my grandma and grandpa's. And so we were doing like vegetables and we had a CSA, but I was still working for like USDA. We were just kind of transitioning into something, trying some different things.
Is that when you started working with Sean?
I started working with Sean with a wild rice or manoomin brought us together. I heard that there was this cool native guy and he was doing this native cuisine and he won the Beardsley Award. And I was like, oh, I got to meet this guy. He sounds really cool, you know? So then there was my wife and all her connections. She's like, you know, this Sean's looking for wild rice. He's looking for different native herbs and plants and all these things that you love to harvest because I'm kind of a seasonal harvester. I'll go out and pick mushrooms and make salads from basswood leaves and the little fiddleheads. And I kind of grew up doing all that stuff, you know, like I said, the seasonal patterns. So I was intrigued with him and I wanted to meet him at least and see what he was doing, you know. And then we got him some of our different products and wild rice. I think I picked some sumac for him too because he makes a wonderful tea out of that. And yeah, he was looking for products from native producers or native community members and stuff. So that's how we connected through, I think it was mainly through the manoomin he liked. And then when we started the bison, that was just like a natural too.
I think he mentioned that you showed up in an old hatchback. True. I'm fact checking here.
Yeah. My wife, she has like a little white hatchback car. And so we loaded crazy amount of wild rice in the back of there and we hauled it down and delivered it. And I met him out there on the loading dock and I thought right away, I like this guy. He's cool. And he's invited me in to try some samples of these different things. And I thought right away, oh, wow, this is amazing. And then from there, we kept thinking maybe Sean would be interested in this at the restaurant. And then I think that actually helped us get into just telling the story and making more connections. We were working with ACO already, the American Indian Housing in Duluth, with our CSA box that happened during the big pandemic of 2019 or whatever, you know. And so everyone was all scared, wearing masks, and we were bringing the boxes, and it was kind of helpful because it was a scary time for people getting their food and everything. So the food would get dropped off, and then the boxes would get brought out to vehicles, and we had heirloom tomatoes, peppers, just all the different kind of vegetables you can grow around here in the garden. Mostly we tried to concentrate on really healthy stuff like cabbages and kales and kohlrabis and carrots and things that would keep. And then each week we would put together like a little recipe that would go with the box too. Maybe some native twists and turns to it if we could, you know. And then if we were light on vegetables, we'd throw a bag of wild rice in with it because we wanted the box to be of a certain value. I did smoke Lake Superior whitefish. So my thing was that the fish were freshly swimming in Lake Superior. Then they get harvested into the brine, and within 3 days, you're getting them in your box. and people just loved it, but it was kind of a lot of work because I'd have to be trying to do all those vegetables and then smoke the fish. And that was multitasking too, because I was still kind of juggling my job at the USDA at the same time. But my wife was a huge part of it. And the kids, our two older kids, they still talk about it and they want to do it again. I think that's why he's so good at math, because he was counting all that stuff when he was like 4 years old,
So now you're selling mainly native rice, native grains, and bison meat. Is that right?
Yep. And we do maple syrup and we do honey. We have bees. So we do raw honey too.
What year did you start working with Sean?
I think it wasn't too long after 2019, huh?
And his restaurant, right? It's been sold out for years. How is that, the volume of what he needs from you, impacting your operation?
Well, I'm just trying to keep expanding as much as I can. And my wild rice, I couldn't keep up with I rice for 20 days in a row sometimes during ricing season. But I buy the wild rice from local ricers as much as I can. Sometimes I got to go as far as Canada, just depending on the weather patterns and where the rice is at that year, But yeah, I have it wood parched and then processed the traditional way that we like it as Native people. So it's a little lighter color and it cooks up nice.
Can you explain the process and the difference for me?
Our tradition is that we go out the first day and we only harvest rice for maybe a few hours. Then we'll come in and we'll parch the rice in a kettle over a wood fire. And then we'll dance on the rice in a jigging pit that's lined with a hide. And then we'll winnow the rice with your back to the wind with a birch bark basket. You throw the rice up and the shaft will blow out and you'll be left with it just looks like that first rice of the season almost looks like green grass. It's real shiny in the basket. And when you cook it, the water turns kind of a light green color. And then we'll cook it and have a little feast and thanks to the lake for giving us food again. We'll put out a spirit plate, but that's the traditional way we did it. And the whole community worked together on everything, from the harvesting of animals to the harvesting of rice. My grandma said when she was a little girl that her job was to lay the birch bark out. See, the birch trees, they'll peel in like June. About now, they would lay all that birch bark out flat on the ground, get it ready for ricing season. And they would lay the rice and let it dry and turn it. And the harvesters, they'd be harvesting. The dryers would be turning it. And the parchers would parch it. And the jiggers or the dancers would dance. It was the whole community effort, Well, nowadays, we got mechanical means of doing some of that stuff. But we still do traditional, too. There's just something about it. You can't beat the flavor of that. But we'll make sure that we use a wood fire under there to heat the grain. It's not really grain. It's actually an aquatic grass seed, wild rice is. Annual aquatic grass seed. So every year, the kernels sprout on the bottom of the lake and grow all the way through the water column and all the way up into the air, even like 6 feet tall in some lakes. Can you imagine that just from a little grain? And so it's super dependent on the weather, water chemistry of the lake and all that. But the manoomin is like sacred food to the Ojibwe. That's how we were able to live here. Without the manoomin, we probably wouldn't be able to even live around here in the winter times. We use that same process with the wood, and then we try to harvest the rice and process it right away. The paddy rice industry, they lay the rice around and it turns black and it gets kind of that moldier flavor, strong flavor to it. And it just doesn't compare to the real thing, Plus it's grown in like man-made paddies. And like I was saying, the soil really makes the food. I think we're going to find out more in the future how important the soil and the water are to us as humans. We got to protect that because we're mostly made up of water, and the soil is life. It's the building blocks of life. And where something's grown really affects the way it feeds your body. Kind of worries me today with all the pesticides and herbicides and crops that they spray Roundup on. and all that kind of stuff. I try to stay away from that kind of thing. And I feel bad that people have to eat that, and they don't have a choice because it's kind of being incorporated into all of our food.
And all of the land that you're using for the bison and for rice, that's native land?
Yeah.
So you have access beyond your ranch to these lakes and to...
Yeah, we have 5 lakes here on the reservation. The river that flows through our ranch, you can canoe to all them lakes right on that river. And then the ceded territory is covered with wild rice lakes from here to Iowa. And at one time it went all the way down to Texas and Florida, wild rice. But it won't go too much further west of here because of the pH in the soils. That's why you don't see wild rice growing in like South Dakota and North Dakota, and it's too alkaline over there. And that's why as Anishinaabe people, we want to really protect the water and the air and all that around here, because that's a delicate resource. If you change the pH, if you pollute that water, the rice won't grow anymore.
Are you supplying any other places? You said you sell halves and wholes.
Haven't yet, but we're starting to. We're just going to start opening our butcher shop up here in the next couple of weeks. But I probably won't really do anything until fall, probably, when the grass starts to kind of diminish toward maybe like October, November. That's when I'll probably start harvesting bison here on the ranch. But right now we're having them processed at a USDA facility because it all has to be, inspected and all that stuff. But then I think Sean, he likes to age it himself. I seen his operation, what they're doing down there, and they're doing some good things.
So he gets the meat from the USDA processor through you.
Yeah.
And then he takes care of how he wants to prepare it.
Yeah. He just likes the big cuts, and then he cuts them the way he wants.
And are you finding that other restaurants or other purveyors are more interested in having bison meat and native rice?
Yeah. We were selling our rice to a couple restaurants in Duluth, Sarah's Table and the Duluth Grill. And then they heard about that Sean's restaurant and the Bison. So we started providing a burger for the Duluth Grill. And they make a really nice bison smash burger. And then Sarah's Table does a bison roast. It's amazing. It was on what's it called? Diners, Drive-ins, and Dives or something like that. Yeah. Guy Fiera, he came up and he did a little show on it, and he loved it. So I want to try to keep up with the amount of bison I need. And I'm actually networking with some of my tribal friends in different areas that have farms to help them market some of their animals too, as long as they're raised. My requirement, and I think Sean's requirement, is that they're raised on grass, because I've been to a few bison farms where it's like a feedlot. They cut their horns off and they're feeding them like grain and stuff. And it's like, this makes me feel sad to see animals that can't have access to the grass, at least,
Yeah. And how many bison do you have now? Can I ask that question?
Well, we have like 60 right here on the ranch. Then I'm a partner with this other guy in South Dakota. So we got probably another 60 head out there. But we're trying to build up the cow numbers so that we can have, like this year, we had a bunch of new babies born. And now we got some younger bulls that we need to harvest off by sometime this fall, So we're just kind of rotating them through. But yeah, it's a numbers game. You got to make sure you're keeping up with everything.
Throughout this conversation, food is never discussed as something that is simply produced. Wild rice exists because the water chemistry is right. The water chemistry exists because the ecosystem is healthy. The harvest exists because a community shows up to participate. In many modern food systems, we tend to think of food as the starting point, the thing we want to maximize. Here, food is the end result of countless relationships functioning well. The rice becomes a reminder that abundance cannot be manufactured independently of the conditions that create it. You don't get healthy food by focusing on food alone. You get it by caring for the water, the soil, the plants, the animals, and the people that make the harvest possible. Is it similar to a cow, beef cows where it's 2 years or so? before you harvest them, or is it longer?
Maybe a little longer for the bison. I think if you want the nice size steaks and you want the animal that, I think it's more like maybe like up to 6 months longer. And I like to harvest in the winter for multiple reasons, but we do it year round. But I think the hides are nicer. And it's just better without flies and dealing with all that kind of thing,
That makes sense. And are you still foraging and delivering that kind of special ingredients?
Not so much. It's mostly just the rice now and the bison. And we do the syrup seasonally and the sugar and the honey. That's one of our main products too.
Was Sean excited about your shift into bison?
He said it was good quality, and they do a lot with like the bones too and stuff. They just use a lot of the really unique things to make sauces and flavor their different dishes and stuff.
And are you connected with what's going on beyond the restaurant with Native and what they're working on in terms of the community of tribal groups out there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're doing a lot of great outreach things and helping businesses grow and helping people reconnect to their native foods again. It can only get bigger and better as we go.
Well, you're a part of that.
Yeah. And I'm trying to do this like a generational thing. I mean, all this investment in infrastructure and sweat equity, building fences and all that stuff. Some of my friends are like, don't you just want to go fishing and have fun? And I'm like, this is fun for me though. And then my kids will be able to do these things into the future. And I don't know. I still got time to do a little fishing and hunting too, I guess. But
where did the bison come from?
They came from Navarro. It's on the South Dakota, Nebraska border. And it's a braided stream. I think it's the Missouri River that goes through there, and it's really beautiful. And there's a lot of history there with the Plains Native groups from different ones. It was kind of like a travel route through there. And I noticed the bison just love, I don't know if they have some kind of a innate memory or whatever, but they love it when they get back by the river where it's flowing and stuff. I don't know if they like have that in their DNA or what, but they love to play around. And there's like a sandy, wet area by the river, and they go there a lot. But yeah, they came from there and they were part of this nature conservancy. And then we got a bull from Red Lake. I was not expecting that. I didn't have a bull, and we were kind of getting worried, like, oh, we got to get a bull. And I was going to these things, and there was all these like auctions, and I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to haul them and all that stuff. So anyways, I was on this panel with this nice elderly lady from Red Lake. She's head of their farm up there. And it was right around Thanksgiving or something. And she was talking about getting this Christmas box for the elders. And she said, oh, I'm going to put this in there and this. And she was telling me, and she said, I'd really like to get some smoked fish. She was thinking some kind of smoked fish. And I told her, well, I got this friend of mine. He's kind of a relative of mine up at Grand Portage. I said, he's been getting all kinds of these big whitefish. And she said, oh, those used to be in our lake, but they're not there anymore because of the warming water temperatures. So I called the guy up and I said, hey, are you still getting a lot of big whitefish? And he's like, yeah, I got a lot of them. And so I said, well, can you bring me down like 500 pounds? And so he brought a whole truckload of fish. And so I called her up and I was like, hey, I got a bunch of fish for you for your Christmas boxes. And so she was all excited about it. And they took some back fresh and some I smoked for them. And then they were going to smoke some up there because they smoke them up there too. And so anyways, she was going to pay me. And I was like, well, I didn't really know what to ask her. I was like, just, have them. It's like almost Christmas. It didn't cost me hardly nothing. I gave the guys some money for the fish, but not a lot. And so then like about a month later, she calls and she's like, hey, I heard you might be looking for a bull. And we got this bull and he's kind of related to the cows up here. And his name's Renegade. And so she sent me a picture of him. This beautiful bull. He was probably like, I don't know, like 4 or 5 years old. And so anyways, that spring, I called her up and she said, yeah, you better come and get him if you want him. And so I went up there and all I had was an old rusty horse trailer. And my crazy friend that likes rodeo stuff, he's like this old guy that I met. That's a whole nother story. Anyway, he comes out to the ranch and he says he never leaves unless he's bleeding or something happens. But anyways, so we went all the way to Red Lake and we got up there and pulled in. These guys were like, "Oh, are you guys from Fond du Lac?" And I was like, "Yeah." And it's like, "Oh, you came to get Renegade, huh?" I'm like, "Yeah, where is he at?" And he said, "Oh, he's out in that 100-acre field over there." And I'm like, "Great, how are we going to get him?" There's no corral or nothing. So they had some corral panels. So we moved the corral panels around and we tried to think, oh, well, how are we going to chase him out of that 100 acres, get him over there? But here they come walking up, Renegade and Jumbo and a couple babies, and then the whole rest of the herd, like 100 bison come walking up. And they went right by the thing. It was just like clockwork. Like we were there for like 20 minutes and there they were, It's crazy. And so then we caught them bulls in that we put a panel across and sectioned it off. And then we couldn't figure out how to get them to go into that trailer. So I came up with the idea that we'd have a rope on the door so we could pull the door shut. And both of the bulls, after like 2 hours, I said, I don't want to get the bulls mad. I don't want to try to whip at them or nothing. So we put these little mineral things that they like, and we got them up kind of close to the trailer. And then we kind of scared them, and they both ran into the trailer and knocked one of my doors off the hinges on the side. And they were like running into each other. And one knocked the wind out of him. I think he fell down in the trailer. And the other one ran out, and I slammed the door shut with the rope. And then my friend Dan said, "Oh, don't you think we should have gotten the bigger one?" I'm like, "Are you kidding?"
Did you get Renegade or did you get a different one?
Jumbo went out and Renegade stayed in. And the story of Renegade, when he was like a year and a half old, he ran away from the Red Lake enclosure and he was almost all the way to Bemidji, Minnesota. And they thought, well, people were calling, "You got a buffalo over here and he's almost by town." The tribe was going to go over and harvest him. And like within 2 days of when they were going to go try to find him and harvest him, he came all the way back and he was standing by the gate. And they opened the gate and he went back in. Isn't that crazy? They wrote a children's book about him. So I'll never shoot Renegade. He's going to live his life out.
And now you have another bull or a few.
Yeah, we got Brutus from the zoo. And
really?
Yeah. So Brutus lived his whole life at the zoo. He came from the Teddy Roosevelt herd out in North Dakota by the Montana border. And he's got this big puffy hairdo. We say he's got the Badlands hairdo, and he's huge. He's just a monster. So anyway, we went to the zoo, and that was a totally different experience. They tranquilized him, and they checked everything, and brushed his teeth, and did all kinds of stuff, and loaded him on this thing. We had to drag him into the trailer while he was sleeping, and then he woke up in there. And when he got here, I thought, oh, great. I wonder if he's going to fight with Renegade and bust the fences, because he's huge. I mean, he was like riding in my horse trailer like this. I thought, God, I didn't even know if it would hold him. And so anyway, we let him off in the corral and he was grunting and they were grunting back and forth. And I was thinking, boy, I don't know. And then he chased Dan across the corral and almost killed Dan. Dan barely made it up on the gate. It was like a rodeo. And so finally we let him out and he went out there and him and Renegade started hitting their heads together for like a couple minutes. And then Renegade stepped back and he took off out into the brush. And Brutus was hanging out with all the cows and whatever, but it wasn't even mating season. And then 2 weeks later, they were best buddies. So now they're just walking around together and they hang out together and they don't fight anymore. And I guess Brutus, like he wouldn't even eat at the zoo. He was all depressed. Now he's just running around, getting all dirty. He loves it.
He's got a best friend and a bunch of ladies.
Oh my God. He's living the perfect life out there. He's rubbing all the trees and tearing up and rolling in the dirt. Oh my God.
David speaks about his bison the way many people speak about family members. Renegade is the wanderer who found his way home. Brutus is the former zoo resident, learning how to be wild again. Each animal has a story, a personality, and a place within the larger life of the ranch. It would be easy to dismiss this as sentimentality, but I think it's something deeper. When animals become more than units of production, decisions are guided not only by economics, but by responsibility, observation, and care. In that sense, the quality of the food begins long before it reaches the plate. It starts in the relationship between the farmer and the living things entrusted to them. That's what David's story ultimately reveals, that the best ranchers are not simply raising animals. They're paying attention to them, learning from them, and caring for them in a way that shapes everything that follows. I'm thinking in my head about the past and the future because you are working in that space. And I'm wondering what you think is coming down the road for you.
Well, I think the more local food that we can produce, the better off we're going to be because of multiple reasons as a community, as a society. And if you look at the big picture for transporting stuff all over and growing things that have major requirements, and plus we got to think of our soils. We can't just keep putting herbicides and pesticides and everything because it builds up over time. And I think it gets into our water, into our food and everything. So I think the more we can do local agriculture and know where your food's coming from so you can feel good about eating and not be worried about like, oh, am I eating a little bit of glyphosate every time I take a bite of something. And I think we can turn that around at this point. I always think about when you think about these guys and their big tractors and spray and everything. And then there's the guy going to the gym trying to get exercise. I think we should try to incorporate the exercise and the whole thing together and reward people for growing good quality stuff too. Like everyone wants to get cheap stuff and all that, but in the long run, I think it might not be a good thing. I like to support the local farmer and I like to eat good food that has good flavors in it. And I think getting that exercise, a lot of people be like, oh, isn't it so much work, all that weeding? And then they're the same people that are at the gym lifting weights. It's like, come on, go pull some weeds and do some stuff right on the farm. I think there's something to like touching the soil, being a little more grounded. I don't think we realize how important the energy flow is from the earth to the plants, to the humans. And I kind of think that plants are smarter than we give them credit for. Like when we go out to harvest the wild rice, if we go into a certain part of the lake and we start to harvest, it'll start to ripen all up around there. Like the plants know, it's time to put on the seed because they're coming. And then when you're harvesting the rice, when you're putting your pole in the water like that, you're cultivating it. I think that's amazing exercise. I encourage anyone to try gathering their own wild rice. It's a labor of love, but it's so rewarding to be able to eat all winter on something that you harvested yourself too,
Is that an invitation?
Sure, come on up. We do a rice camp every year. We teach the youth and anyone else that wants to come kind of later toward the end of the rice season. Usually it's a little cooler. It's the second week, usually in September. And we basically teach them everything they say not to do in a canoe. Stand up, lean over the side. Sometimes you get a bath too. I mean, you got to kind of learn how to balance, but you're pulling and then the knocker's sweeping the rice in. It's kind of like a dance with your race partner because you're just working in harmony together. If the puller pulls just right, it makes it easier on the knocker. And the rhythm of the sound of the rice just falling into the canoe, kind of a healing experience. And then the colors of the rice, they just swaying in the wind, all the purples and yellows and the smell of it. It's like you're just part of it. You're part of the process. And that's what I get when I'm out there with the bison too. When you're right in there with you can smell their breath and they're grunting and they're just, I don't know, there's something about being connected to the natural world. I think more people need to do that. And I think it would be good for everyone's mental health. That's why we really encourage people to come out to the farm and visit. And everyone that comes out pretty much becomes a new customer. I mean, they just want to try something. We offer a discounted price when they're out here at the farm and stuff too. My wife gives away a ton of samples, so everyone loves it.
You're talking a lot about, these delicious foods and the land and the soil and making sure that you're protecting that, but you're also resurrecting what's been taken. And where you're talking about your grandfather and the treaties that he worked on. I mean, those didn't really work out.
Well, they did work out in my mind that we still have the right to hunt, fish, and gather in our whole traditional area from here all the way through Michigan. And we have good, clean water and food here still that we can live off the land. So in some ways, they worked out okay. And I think a lot of those old chiefs, they had the insight to see that the future was going to be different no matter what. And so it'd be better to work together than to fight against each other, I think that's where his heart was in the whole thing. And he was kind of an environmentalist, the way I think about it. He was like letting everyone utilize these resources, but in a good way. There's plenty to go around if you treat things good,
That's an important lesson for people to learn. I think people are maybe starting to wake up in small places to understand that we haven't been doing a great job taking care of our land.
And I think the Department of Agriculture needs to change its whole way of encouraging small family farms. At one point in this country, small family farms were a lot more prevalent, and then they kind of lost way to corporate farms, And I don't know, I guess I wouldn't just blame the USDA, but we always think we're smarter than we are, I think, in some ways. Like we might be outsmarting ourselves with all these chemicals and it's going to be easier because we got all these big tractors. But what are we doing long term to the aquifers, and what are we doing to the soil, and what are we doing to ourselves if we're putting these chemicals on there? We know these chemicals aren't good, but we continue to put them on. That's what scares me. And I'm glad on this reservation that they don't allow that kind of stuff. They can't spray chemicals on the roadways and things.
Who governs that?
Our tribal government. And I think that people in general need to get more educated on where their food comes from and what kind of amendments are putting into it.
What do you think of the role of a restaurant like Owamni, or even just restaurants in general having a role in sharing some of this?
Well, I think they're great educational places. Didn't realize the amazing flavors and high quality food that some of these wild environments produced. And we look at these things as a gift from the creator, the rice. We don't own it. It's just here for us to take care of and utilize. There's an example. Same thing with the bison. That's why I say I'd like to see more of them roaming and reconnect some of their migration corridors and things like that. And I hope in the future that maybe these restaurants and these different grassroots organizations can influence our government in a good way to make sure that people in charge are aware that we want good quality. I think quality over quantity. Instead of paying all these healthcare costs for people that are sickly from eating these bad foods, maybe we'd be better off investing in our food systems to have healthier communities.
I believe that. I really do. Is there anything that I haven't asked you or that we haven't discussed that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I'd just like to thank Sean and people like him for doing all the hard work to gather all these traditional recipes and create recipes of their own and bring an awareness of these great things that we have to offer from the native culture and create opportunity for people like me to be able to work with the land and work with the resources to utilize them in a good way.
It's funny how each episode of One Bite is Everything has a tidbit that catches my attention, and it's not always the headline. In this conversation with David Wise, I find myself thinking about this. When David studied forest ecology in college, he realized that his grandmother had been a forest ecologist all along. She had known when to plant, She had known how weather moved through the landscape. His family managed waterways for wild rice, burned fields with an understanding of wildlife and habitat, harvested seasonally, preserved food through the winter, and paid attention to the relationships among plants, animals, water, people, and place. The knowledge was there. That language came later, and I think that idea runs through this entire conversation. David's story could be about preserving tradition, and it is, but I don't think that's quite right, because preservation can make something sound frozen in time. What David is doing is alive. He's bringing bison back to land where they once belonged, but he's also building miles of fencing and thinking about how those animals move through wet and dry landscapes as weather patterns become more erratic. He's harvesting manoomin in a tradition that goes back generations while also building markets for it today. He's learning from elders, experimenting with dry aging, making products from bison tallow, developing a processing facility, supplying restaurants, working with other native producers, and raising children who are growing up inside of all of it. And then there's the relationship with Chef Sean Sherman. I will link the conversation with Sean in the show notes. These two are so good to listen to together. I've been thinking a lot lately about what happens when a farmer and a chef truly see one another, not as a vendor and a customer, but as partners in something bigger. David brings wild rice, bison, knowledge, place, history, a way of understanding food that begins long before an ingredient ever reaches the kitchen. Sean brings the ability to transform those ingredients, serve them, tell their story, create a demand for them, and help more people imagine indigenous food not as something that disappeared into history, but as something living, evolving, delicious, and present. That relationship changes what is possible for both of them. And I think that matters far beyond one ranch or one restaurant. Because one of the biggest questions in our food system is not simply how we produce more food. It's how we create the conditions for good food to exist at all. David reminded us that wild rice does not begin with wild rice. It begins with water, with the chemistry of a lake, with an ecosystem healthy enough to support an aquatic grass that grows from the lake bottom all the way through the water and into the air. It depends on weather. It depends on people who know when and how to harvest it. It depends on a community willing to carry the work forward. The bison do not begin with meat. They begin with land and grass, water, space, fencing, care, knowledge, and a relationship between people and animals that David describes not simply as agricultural, but as relational. Maybe that's what I'm taking from this conversation most of all. Food is the visible result of relationships we often cannot see. Between water and rice, between grass and bison, between a grandmother and a grandson, between an ancestor and a dream, between a farmer and a chef, between parents and children, between what was interrupted and what can still be restored. And maybe that's why David's story feels so hopeful to me. He's not trying to go backward to what once was. He's carrying something forward. If you listen closely, I think you could hear the future in this conversation, in the hooves of bison returning to the land, in the wild rice, in his children helping to build fences, in a chef creating demand for ingredients that carry culture and history. And yes, even in thousands and thousands of bison hot dogs. That is how food systems change. Not all at once, through relationships, through memory, markets, and through people deciding that something valuable should not disappear. I send my thank yous to David Wise for sharing his stories with me. And thank you for listening to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that connects every bite you take to the bigger world. If this conversation meant something to you, I hope you'll share it with someone. Send them the episode. Talk about it. Bring one more person into the conversation. And if you value the work that we do here, I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review One Bite is Everything on Apple Podcasts. I have a goal of reaching 100 new reviews this year, and every single one helps more people like you discover the show. One Bite is Everything is in the top 3% of podcasts globally, with more engagement than 88% of podcasts on Spotify, and that growth happens because of you. This episode was co-produced by Sonia Dillon with sound design and original music by Russell Chappa. I'm so grateful for this amazing and mighty team. I'm your host, Dana DiPrima, and I'll be back again next week with another episode of One Bite is Everything. Until then, eat like it matters, because it does.